January 30th, 1933. Thousands of Nazi paramilitaries march through the Brandenburg Gate in a torchlight parade. Inside the Chancellery, Germany's conservative politicians congratulate themselves. They had just appointed Adolf Hitler as Chancellor, believing that by surrounding him with traditional ministers, they had successfully boxed him in. These elites ignored the reality of the force they had just legitimized. Hitler's private army, the SA, had already swollen to 400,000 men, dwarfing the official German military. Bringing this paramilitary organization into the fold of the state handed a private army of thugs the authority of the law. Traditional politicians dismissed Hitler's violent rhetoric as harmless performance meant for his base. This failure to take extremist language seriously allowed a radical outsider to secure the specific levers of power required to dismantle the Republic from the inside out. Years earlier, Hitler was a failed artist drifting through Vienna. After the Academy of Fine Arts rejected him twice, he refused to seek regular work, eventually slipping into homeless shelters. He spent his afternoons in cafes reading anti-Semitic pamphlets, festering with the idea that his own personal failures were actually the result of a grand racial conspiracy against the German people. World War I rescued him from this aimless isolation. For the first time, he had a steady purpose and a uniform to hide his failures. In the frozen trenches of the Western Front, he found a rigid structure that offered him the only sense of belonging he had ever known. Germany's sudden surrender in 1918 shattered this identity. Unable to accept the defeat, Hitler weaponized the stab-in-the-back myth. He began preaching that the German army had remained undefeated on the battlefield, only to be betrayed by Marxist revolutionaries and Jewish intellectuals at home. Hitler's ultimate danger lay in this psychological fusion. He took his own pathetic personal rejections and projected them onto a fractured nation. When he spoke, he offered millions of traumatized Germans exactly what he had given himself: a clear list of enemies to blame for their suffering. His first attempt to seize power was a disorganized disaster. In 1923, he led thousands of stormtroopers in a chaotic march on the Bavarian government. The beer hall putsch collapsed in hours under police gunfire, ending with Hitler fleeing and eventually facing a trial for high treason. Hitler used his trial to secure a massive propaganda victory. Sympathetic judges allowed him to turn the courtroom into a platform for his ideas, and his subsequent comfortable confinement gave him the time to dictate Mein Kampf, a blueprint for racial struggle and military conquest. Behind bars, he realized that a modern state could not be toppled by armed games from the street. Success required a more patient strategy, taking the legal path and using the rules of democracy to dismantle the system from within. This pivot made him a unique threat. By disguising his extremist goals as a legitimate political movement, he made it difficult for the authorities to stop him without appearing to violate the very democratic principles he was working to destroy. The Wall Street crash of 1929 provided the necessary chaos. As American loans vanished, the German economy collapsed, leaving 6 million people unemployed. The centrist parties became paralyzed by infighting, creating a vacuum of desperation, making Hitler's radical promises suddenly appealing. Nazi propagandists bypassed intellectual debate entirely, instead saturating public spaces with simple, emotionally manipulative slogans. They plastered every available surface with messaging targeting specific resentments of different classes, marketing national rebirth through racial purity. On February 27, 1933, the German parliament building, the Reichstag, erupted in flames. Hitler immediately claimed the arson was the opening strike of a violent Marxist uprising. He used the smoke and panic to justify a total suspension of the country's constitutional protections. Hitler convinced the aging President von Hindenburg to sign the Reichstag fire decree. This single piece of emergency paperwork permanently suspended civil liberties across Germany, allowing the state to censor the press and arrest citizens without trial. Hitler dismantled the Republic using this specific emergency decree, legally signed by an elected leader in a moment of manufactured panic. The death of German democracy was a bureaucratic act, not a military one. Heinrich Himmler approached state repression as an administrative challenge. A cold, meticulous organizer, he prioritized systemic control over the chaotic violence of early street brawls, building a new machinery of terror to enforce the party's will. Himmler opened Dachau in March 1933 as an extrajudicial detention center for political enemies. By inviting the press to report on the facility, he ensured the camp's existence would serve as a public warning to anyone considering resistance. To populate Dachau, the Nazis weaponized protective custody. They inverted a legal concept meant to protect individuals from mobs, claiming the state needed protection from citizens. This allowed the Gestapo to detain people indefinitely without filing charges or seeing a judge. This created a legally sanctioned black hole. Stripping the detention process of judicial review, the SS secured absolute power, operating in a void where traditional law no longer existed. Under Theodor Eicke, the camp system became a model of industrial efficiency. Eicke drafted precise regulations for every aspect of prisoner life, treating the psychological and physical breaking of human beings as a predictable, factory-like process. This chart shows the visual categorization stripping inmates of individuality. Prisoners were organized by colored triangles, red for political opponents, pink for homosexuals, yellow for Jews. Every detail was documented, like prisoner 2307 here, ensuring daily cruelty was recorded as routine administration. By recording every punishment in triplicate and requiring a supervisor's rubber stamp, the regime stripped violence of its moral weight. For the guards, the brutality became indistinguishable from routine government administration. The system's capacity was stress-tested during Kristallnacht in 1938. In a single night of coordinated raids, the Gestapo arrested 30,000 Jewish men, successfully absorbing them into the camps almost overnight and proving the machinery could handle mass intake. As World War II began and German conquests grew, this camp model expanded across Europe. Millions of foreign citizens and resistance fighters were swept into a standardized network of repression that had been refined for years inside Germany. The infrastructure originally built to detain political rivals was easily scaled to manage millions. By 1942, the Nazi leadership utilized the very same bureaucratic procedures and guard training they had perfected years earlier to implement a campaign of industrial-scale genocide. The gas chambers represented the final, horrifying evolution of an administrative machine Hitler had been perfecting since 1933. This scalable engine of genocide was built on the foundation of extrajudicial detention and guard training established years before the war. By April 1945, Hitler's empire had been reduced to a ruined landscape of rubble and ash. He died by suicide in a concrete bunker, leaving the German people to face the total destruction he had led them into. The final ruin of the nation began with legal documents and the apathy of a society trading civil liberties for the promise of order. German democracy vanished behind the signatures on emergency decrees issued during a moment of manufactured panic. Grave, this history remains a warning. Extraordinary evil does not arrive as a sudden explosion of chaos. It arrives as a legally sanctioned system, supported by a desperate public, and executed through the meticulous, quiet work of government paperwork.